Let's talk about the causes of SIBO. Number one, we mentioned stress, and let's talk about how that works in the body. And this is something that I really talk to my clients about is mind, body, and spirit. You're not going to correct a problem just through diet, just through supplements. You need to make sure you're sleeping. You need to make sure you're managing your perceived stress. We all are going to have stressors through the end of life. I love the fact that so many people talk about, well, if just I could get enough money in the bank, then the stress will go away. Or just when I turn 50 and everything's in order, the stress will go away. That's not the way life works, guys. The universe, God, whatever your beliefs are, the challenges are going to keep coming. So it's more of perceived stress. So that's one thing I really want to hone in on is how is stress leading to SIBO?
Well, stress is, I call it, the ultimate fire starter. And so we now know that there are more neurotransmitters in our GI tract that there are in our brain and central nervous system. And those neurotransmitters signal to how the GI tract will colonize, how it will communicate. And one of those, epinephrine, which I call the dirty cupcake in particular, which is the stress hormone, we have the secreted by the adrenals. So there are two stress hormones secreted by the adrenals, cortisol and epinephrine, very similar. And epinephrine in particular, I call the dirty cupcake. So that's the adrenaline that we push when we're in fight or flight. Well, adrenaline is going to open up the tight junctions of your small intestine and your large intestine. It's going to feed the pathogens. So the reason why stress is such a fire starter, it actually gives fodder, food, strength to these guys, these pathogens, these commensal bacteria that were hanging out. And now all of a sudden you just gave them, a birthday cake.
Right.
So the dirty cupcake, as I call it. So you've given them a fat and a sugar, and it actually helps. It activates the flagella of these little guys, the little hairs, a little antenna. And now they go in and they go, we're going to be bullies in your sandbox. We're going to gang up against you. And so stress can be really, really the key in very much a lot of GI issues. And so you were talking about life stressors. So yes, we have the drip of the daily stress, but I don't want to leave out another stressor to our body. And actually we had a client this morning that this is a perfect example. She had a physical stressor of over exercising. Mm-hmm. So she gets up at 4:15 in the morning. She does her boot camp at 5 a.m. So she gets up, she gets her coffee. That's going to increase her histamine and her cortisol response. And then she works out and has so much cortisol and adrenaline. That was feeding her gut dysbiotically. And so because she manages stress every other way, she has a beautiful matched genetic diet. And we're like, okay, we missed something in your stress response. So tell me exactly what you do every minute of your day. And so we found that she's actually getting herself up at 4 a.m. when the adrenals are already taxed, drinking caffeine, which is a histamine, and pushing more cortisol, and then pushing a ton of cortisol during that very heavy workout. So that alone, even though everything in her life was otherwise balanced, was enough to mess her up.
So I have to ask, because I just did a huge focus on caffeine and coffee, and that will be next week's topic for everyone listening. Is it caffeine or is it coffee that's a histamine?
Well, it's both. So coffee is a histamine and caffeine increases cortisol.
So all of us need to be managing, and that's also has something to do with our genetics and our ability to metabolize caffeine and coffee as well. So this is very interesting because sometimes I just have my hot tea that's got a little caffeine and I feel great. And then there's days where, gosh, I just need a little extra boost, and oh, that boost felt good. So maybe I'm going to do it again with the coffee the next day and the next day. And I find, Terry, that I can throw my back out or pull a back muscle during my workout in the morning. And it always comes down to the period of time where I reintroduce the coffee. So this is this is an aha moment for me. Just the inflammation, and your back is where your adrenals are and your kidneys are, and putting pressure on the muscles. So maybe you can just emphasize that a little bit more of what's going on in my body.
Yeah. So it's really fascinating what the body's feedback mechanisms are in terms of communication. And so, why could this be happening to you in particular? Well, when you push cortisol, it's also a fat as well as a sugar. And when we push fat, we become fat malabsorbed. When we become fat malabsorbed, we're less likely to hold our structural alignment in place because we can get ligament lax because we're not holding on to that collagen structure. And then you add histamine on top of it, which is inflammatory, right? And then what I will say is, I think a continuing glucose monitor should be on I'm metabolically flexible. I just got my hemoglobin A1C back. It's 4.8. It's really phenomenal. However, I do a continuing glucose monitor. And what I will say, when I exercise the mornings that I am tired, even in a fasted state, I push cortisol, which makes my blood sugar go super high.
Yeah.
So if I have a dysbiotic gut and I'm pushing my sugar super high, I'm going to be feeding it. Now, luckily, I do a lot of other adjunctive methods to keep my gut really happy. And I've rarely had SIBO. I think I can remember once, but since I've gone wild, before I always had GI issues. But that's really fascinating. And if I do that and then have coffee beforehand, then it's a super like, whoa, I look like I'm diabetic. Yet my hemoglobin A1C is perfect or near perfect. So what am I doing? I'm creating a cortisol response from my pushing my adrenals when I'm tired, and then coffee makes it more so. So sometime what we ended up suggesting to this individual, because it wasn't only SIBO, she couldn't lose weight. She is working out 90 minutes and walking 3 miles a day, and she eats super clean. She's a wilditarian. Actually, she's a pescatarian, pesca-wilditarian, because she eats to her genetic blueprint, but she chooses fish only. And we suggested flip your workout, do your heavy workout in the afternoon when cortisol levels are your lowest, do your walking in the morning when your cortisol levels are the highest, which will lower your cortisol. And I bet you if you do nothing else, you're going to lose that weight.
Yep. And something that you just touched on is during last fall, I wasn't sleeping right. I was eating plenty. I was using a blood glucose monitor, but I was through the in-body scan with our friend Heather Hinneker at Ascent. I was seeing my weight wasn't changing, but my fat was increasing and my muscle was decreasing. And that is not what you want to see as a 47-year-old woman, right? We need to keep that muscle mass on. And so there was a cortisol, stress, lack of sleep. I can all tell you that my sleep score now with my Aura Ring is in the 90s every single night, like 94 and above.
Great.
And I've corrected it. And that is a huge contributor to my energy during the day, and getting my cortisol right, because you want the cortisol at the right times. You just don't want it at the wrong times. Okay, so we've been talking about causes of SIBO, and we talked about stress. One thing that I've been talking to my clients about, because of your knowledge and because of what I've learned from you, is the spike protein is dysregulating so many things in our life. It made you go hypoglycemic. It is causing insulin issues. It's causing hormonal issues, fertility issues, all of these things. And I know for me, because I'm so in tune with my body, if I have been exposed to someone with the virus or the spike protein, I get a viral breakout on my skin. It just kind of comes and it goes. And that's my thing. That will not happen to everyone. It will affect other people in different ways, and maybe bring out their weakness or their dominant virus that is just kind of loves to kind of not play nice in the sandbox. So I want to talk about the spike protein and how it is affecting people with SIBO.
So the spike protein, however you grab it, it's in our environment. And the reason why it's called spike is that it's got in corona, the spike is actually a double lipid layer. And the virus, however, it comes in through the spike protein and it dysregulates angiotensin converting enzyme 2. It becomes an ACE2 dysregulator. When ACE2 is dysregulated, it's all in the clinical literature. It will initiate an insulin disruption. It's been tied to insulin receptor disruption, and it can make you either hypo or hyperglycemic. And I just lectured on this at a longevity conference last week. It will turn on, it's been known clinically to turn on the HRH1 gene polymorphism. So it's going to turn on your histamine gene, which is going to affect your SIBO. It's been known to dysregulate GABA, which is really important. GABA is an amino acid that helps manage insulin. It helps manage estrogen. It helps manage follicular function. It helps manage central nervous system function. When GABA is dysregulated, you're going to be insulin potentially dysregulated, endocrinally dysregulated. You're going to be extra estrogen. Estrogen is going to feed candida. Candida is going to feed the SIBO. Insulin is going to be the fat storage hormone because you're oversecreting insulin. So the body's going, I'm going to push epinephrine or cortisol to manage that high insulin. It's going to feed SIBO. Okay, when GABA is disrupted, our neurotransmitters are disrupted. We just talked about it's going to feed SIBO. So it's a real big deal.
And people think GABA is just that happy hormone and has nothing to do with anything else. And it's really interesting. It's been super helpful with my daughter and her hormonal cycle that can be very painful and creating all of these issues. So that is one of my favorite supplements. I just eat it like candy because it's not gonna go over, or I can't really take too much according to what my body's telling me. So you talk about sulfur and oxalates, and I talk a lot about that as well with my clients, and they then say, well, what do we eat? But first I want to talk about sulfur, and all of these healthy vegetables not only could cause estrogen dominance to worsen, right? Because it's backing up our detox pathways, but how is it affecting SIBO?
So the food supply, the industrialization of mass farming has created what used to be really healthy, good for us foods into, you better watch them. And especially if you have a predisposition genetically and in the spike protein environment because it's disrupting sulfur. So why did that happen? Well, the glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup through mass farming, and this is the work of the brilliant Dr. Stephanie Senefet of MIT. She discovered that glyphosate interrupts our body's ability to convert these sulfur compounds into its end product sulfate, which is what we need to manage all the things that can't be managed when sulfur doesn't convert to sulfate, which is endocrine, it's neurohormone, it's joint, it's mental health. And so these good foods, and if you notice, I have done a turnaround in the last 12 years on what I deem to be healthy foods. My first book was very sulfur and oxalate rich. Why? Because I believe that about 12 years ago, or just over a decade ago, we had not hit the tipping point in glyphosate that allowed many of us to consume these foods healthfully, myself included, who have the sulfur oxalate genes. I used to drink a green soup every morning for breakfast that was sulfur oxalate. Right now would be a sulfur oxalate poison for me, but I drank it happily. But with the advent and the tipping point of glyphosate, our genes started getting tripped and we started going, these things that used to protect me are now hurting me. And so gut issues, impaired sulfur processing has been tied to IBS, IBD, ulcerative colitis, SIBO, gut dysbiosis overall. It's been tied to mental health. It's been tied to rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis. It's been tied to kidney dysfunction. It's a big deal. So what are these healthy foods that we used to eat? And we're still, many of us are told to eat. And there are many of these green products. Oh my gosh, I spoke with someone today who's eating this green drink that, and when we have his genetic analysis, I'm like, run for the hills. No wonder you are 37 years old and can't walk up your stairs because of debilitating ankle and knee pain. So the crucifers, cabbage, broccoli, arugula, bok choy, cauliflower, killer kale, as I call it, egg yolks in many cases, garlic and onion, and any sulfa rich, either antibiotics, that's a problem for sure, and or glutathione and acetylcysteine, alpha lipoic acid, those sulfur rich supplements, beware. If you do not have the mechanisms to be able to convert, and or you have been taking in a lot of glyphosate, and or the spike protein is playing in your field, you got a problem with sulfur, and it's not good for you. Broccoli is poison, really potentially poison. And killer kale is poison on many levels because it also absorbs a lot of pesticides, which is absorbing more of the glyphosate that makes things worse.
So out of all of your clients that you test and confirm, what percentage of them should not be eating sulfur?
Well, this is really interesting because with the advent of the pandemic, a much higher population should not be eating sulfur because of that HRH1 conversion. And so sulfur and histamine have an intersection, because also the spike protein has inhibited phase 1 detoxification, which also hits histamine, which then hits impaired sulfation pathway. So much higher. Even people that in the past were able to tolerate sulfur, even in the past several years, are less able. So this is where we do our detective work. Figure out how you feel after you eat something. This gentleman that was talking to me today, he was a brand new client. He's like, I'm not going to name the name of the green powder. It's one of the most popular. He's like, I started eating it and I felt terrible. But my personal trainer told me to gut through it. Well, you don't have to gut through it. The body's giving you feedback. Stop.
Yes. I actually listened to a podcast of someone that is very well known yesterday. And he said, all of these people talking about the wrong vegetables, they don't know what they're talking about. If you are bloated after you have your green smoothie, it's okay. You just need to, and I'm sitting there screaming at my phone going, no, it is not normal to be bloated. It's not normal to be constipated or to have diarrhea. There's a balance. And okay, so with the sulfur, I'm glad we talked about why, because a lot of people will say, I've been eating broccoli and cauliflower all my life. Okay, so with the oxalates, what percentage of your clients shouldn't be having the oxalates?
Well, this is kind of crazy. Again, what I'm calling it the disruptive mirror effect. Our food supply, with the impairment of protein, fat, sulfur, oxalate, and histamine metabolism, is being mirrored by the spike protein. Protein, fat, sulfur, oxalate, and histamine metabolism. So now we're finding that there's calcium channel blocks through the spike protein, so it's creating more calcium oxalate crystals. They found in cadavers, 85% of individuals over 70 years old had oxalate crystals in their thyroid in the COVID cadavers. That's 85%.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's
so
crazy.
Again, oxalates make biofilm. Biofilm make amyloids. Amyloids trip viral loads. Viral loads are getting re-expressed. We now know that the spike protein has 7 vectors of amyloidogenesis. So guess what? It could be making amyloids. That's a brand new study. It's mirroring the food supply, the amyloids from the crowding conditions. Amyloids and biofilm are playing ping-pongy, and as is oxalate. So it's the preponderance, and it's really interesting. I'm saying now it's non-negotiable not to eat wild and look at these big vectors of disruption, because we're having this mirror effect. And I've seen over 3,000 individuals over the pandemic, and it's become this arc of intolerance, this steep arc of intolerance. And so we're heavy in those foods, and especially we've had any impact or current impact to any kind of spike protein and we're predisposed, run from these healthy foods.